Good afternoon and welcome to the ALCTS webinar, Demand-Driven Acquisitions Part 1. I'm Kristen Martin, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee. Presenting today we have Michael Levine-Clark. Michael is the Associate Dean for Scholarly Communications and Collection Services at the Penrose Library at the University of Denver. He holds an MS in Library and Information Science from the University of Illinois and an MA in History from the University of Iowa. He has served as the chair of the Collection Development and Evaluation section of the Reference and User Services Association, has been a member or chair of many committees within RUSA and the Association for Library Collections and Technical Services, and additionally has served on a variety of national and international publisher and vendor library advisory boards. He is currently serving as the co-chair of a NISO working group to develop recommended practices for demand-driven acquisition of monographs, and as the co-editor of the Encyclopedia of Library and Information Science, 4th edition. As we go through the webinar, if you think of questions for Michael, please type them into the question box on your screen, and Mike will do his best to answer them at the conclusion of the presentation. We will also be sending him a copy of any questions that he doesn't get to so that we can have your questions answered. Please note the session will be recorded and you will receive an email shortly after the conclusion of the webinar with a link to the recording and a copy of Michael's slides. And if you're interested, the ALCTS committee invites you to use the Twitter back channel, #ALCTSCE, to interact with other participants during the webinar. However, please note that you should continue to submit questions to Michael in the question box on the screen, because neither Michael nor I will be monitoring the Twitter feed during the presentation. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Michael, and there may be just a slight delay.
All right, so do you see my slides, I hope? Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning if you're on the West Coast. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about demand-driven acquisition, something that I've been talking about a lot to a lot of audiences lately. I'm excited about it and think that it's something that really has tremendous potential for how we build our collections going into the future. Alexa asked me to put a picture of myself up there so you would know who was talking to you, and I'll pause on that screen for a moment or two so that you can take down my email address if you want to, so you can get in touch with me at any point about this presentation. I've been thinking about demand-driven acquisition off and on for more than a decade, and I've been thinking about it really a lot in the last 3 or 4 years as a way of not just supplementing the collection, not just a way of buying some of the ebooks that we buy, but what would it mean to use demand-driven acquisition on a large scale? Is it possible to do it as a way of building the majority of the monograph collection? And so I want to share some of the experiences we've had at the University of Denver with demand-driven acquisition and talk a little bit theoretically about some of the things that might go into building a demand-driven acquisition collection or a demand-driven collection on a larger scale. Some of that will be on the next session on October 3rd, and I know most of you are registered for that second session. So that'll build on this first one. So the first question, I guess the fundamental question, is why demand-driven acquisition? Why do we want to do this? Why is this something that so many of us are talking about? And why do I insist on calling it demand-driven acquisition instead of patron-driven acquisition? And I have my slides got out of order there for a moment. The reason really is that patron-driven acquisition is something that we have always done. Patron-driven acquisition is building collections based on faculty requests or student requests, input, when we look at usage data and change our approval parameters. That's all forms of patron-driven acquisition. And it's something we've always done and something we should continue to do. Demand-driven acquisition takes that patron-driven input and moves it to the point of need. So instead of buying something because a faculty member requests it, we're buying something because a faculty member requests it at the exact moment that he or she needs it. And we're helping her or him to discover that content as well. And so demand-driven acquisition to me is a better term for this thing that we've been talking about a lot in the library world over the last several years. So why demand-driven acquisition? There are several ways you can approach this, and I'm going to approach it from the several angles. So first of all, we don't come anywhere near buying all of the books that are available. We are never going to be able to, in any academic library, give our users everything that they need. And this is University of Denver as an example, but you could plug in your own library numbers and the chart would look very much like this. University of Denver in a typical year, and these data have not changed over the last several years, so there is no date applied to this set of numbers, but it's pretty consistent. At the University of Denver, we typically buy 20 to 25,000 books a year. It's a fairly small number of books. It costs $1 million or more, so it's real money. YBP Library Services, one of the major suppliers of academic monographs in North America, estimates that around 65,000 to 70,000 books are published each year in North America that would be good and suitable for academic libraries. So these are the books that they treat on approval, the books that they tell us about when we have approval plans with them. And that's a pretty good estimation of the scholarly output for monographs for North America. There are probably other ways of measuring it, but that's a fairly decent ballpark figure. There are all sorts of ways of measuring the amount of books published generally in the United States each year, and they tend to hover between about 180,000 and 250,000. I saw an estimate recently that in the United States alone, there are about 1 million self-published books each year. And most of those don't have any place in an academic library, but some of them probably do. And then UNESCO estimates that there are about 1 million books published by publishers worldwide each year. So we are not going to ever come close to providing access to everything our users could need. And under the typical model, under the traditional model, we're buying those books up front, and so we're making a decision right off the bat to not make available most of that content. Here's another argument for demand-driven acquisition, and this comes also from YBP Library Services. And this is for several key publishers, the number of SWIP notifications they sent out in the fiscal year ending in June 2011. So in that year, they sent notifications to many, many libraries based on parameters that we had given them. We had told them we are interested in this particular subject from this set of publishers, meeting these other criteria. And taking one publisher, just for example, Oxford, and Oxford is one of the best performing publishers on this list. In that fiscal year, Oxford published just over 2,100 titles, and these were in print. And YBP sent out 921,000 notifications to libraries about these 2,100 titles. We got these notifications because we had told YBP we were interested in books on these subjects. And then we only ordered 11% of those notifications. So most of the time when we received that notification, we didn't order the book. We ordered some books from Oxford, but not the vast majority. And so even when we're told this is a good academic book from a very, very reputable publisher, we're not ordering that content. And yet, when we do order the content, it doesn't get used. From 2000 to 2004, the University of Denver cataloged just over 126,000, or just under 127,000 titles. And so these were not necessarily things we bought over that time period, but most likely they were. Most of these books were published in that time period, but they were added to the collection during that time. And at the end of the decade, so in December of 2010, so all of these books had had at least 5 years to be discovered. They had at least 5 years for a book review to be written. Even after all that time, almost 40% of them remained unused. They had never circulated. They might have been browsed on the shelf in a few other instances, but most of these had seen very little use. And only 19% had 4 or more uses. So the percentage of books in our collection that see any sort of significant use is relatively small. And this is not new to anybody. This is typical in just about any academic library. And there's real money attached to this. We spent $2.3 million over that time period on these unused books. So the goal of demand-driven acquisition is to take both of those factors, that to take basically the idea that we are never going to buy things that are used 100% of the time, and we're never going to come close to buying everything that's out there. And how do you take those two things and build a better collection? I think that by not buying things up front, by providing access to that material, by letting users decide at the point of need which of those books they want, we can build a better collection. We can broaden the collection out by providing more titles from more publishers and really across more subject areas than we ever can under this traditional model. And we do so by matching acquisition to immediate demand. So instead of buying it up front, you buy it at the point of need. And you pay only for the amount of need in many cases. So you don't buy a book if it's only going to be used once. You lease it. And there's a combination of short-term loans and purchase on demand that make this possible. So I want the collection not to be everything we've bought, not even everything we subscribe to and only have perhaps temporary access to, but everything that we can provide to our users in a timely manner. And timely manner has a different meaning for different libraries, I'm sure. What I mean by this is I want to be able to provide a book to a user in a time that makes sense to him or her. For some users, that might only be immediate, and an ebook would be the only answer, or something that's already in the collection. For other users, a doctoral student, days or weeks might be plenty of time. And so the way I think about this is that we need to provide a menu of choices, and we need to provide a wide range of material that our users can access and that we will buy for our users, we will get for our users when they need it. And so what have we done at the University of Denver? We started relatively early with the concept of demand-driven acquisition, which we were not calling demand-driven acquisition or patron-driven acquisition at that point. In fact, I don't think we really had a term for it yet. But from 1999 to 2005, the Colorado Alliance of Research Libraries, of which we're a member, did probably the first project for demand-driven acquisition of ebooks with NetLibrary. And in this model, the first use was free, and anytime somebody clicked into an ebook the second time, we bought it collectively, and we shared access across the alliance. We did this for 6 years, but all along we recognized that it wasn't actually a very good model. The reason it wasn't a good model was that 2 clicks into the book led to a purchase, and it didn't matter how long you were in the book. A click in, a click out, a click in, a click out, and you bought the book. That's the equivalent of pulling the book off the shelf and deciding you didn't want it and putting it back and having it count as a circulation. We didn't really like that model, and the best example of this is the banana story, which some of you probably heard, but I'm going to share it again because it's a great story and really, really illustrates this point well. The University of Colorado at Boulder had a business class that was doing some sort of assignment relating to bananas, and I think it had to do with import and export of bananas. There were students in that class. It was a large undergraduate class. There were students in that class that found NetLibrary and started searching, and they did a keyword search for bananas, and another student came in and did the same search, and both of those students clicked into the book, and we bought it. And briefly, we owned every book in NetLibrary that had the word banana in it. And this is a true story. We really did own all of these books, and most of them completely irrelevant to that topic. NetLibrary ended up refunding these books, but it shows that you can't have a really effective demand-driven acquisition model if you're buying books before demand is demonstrated. Those books were clearly not needed. They were not the books that those students wanted. We really want to make sure that we can buy things intentionally. We can provide access intentionally, not just because the word happens to be there. The model was also not so great because of careless profiling on our part. And so the collection you build is really only as good as what you put into it. If you're providing books that you don't want in your collection through demand-driven acquisition, it's not the fault of the model that you end up buying those books. It's your fault for making them available in the first place. And we made the mistake of making things available that we really didn't want in our collections. And so that set us back for a while. We stopped with ebooks for quite a while after NetLibrary. We did the eBrary subscription package and basically nothing else for a while. Meanwhile, we've done other things with demand-driven acquisition here at the University of Denver. We buy a lot of things that are requested on interlibrary loan. So if a person requests a book that meets certain criteria based on price and publisher and publication date, we just buy it. We assume that that is a book that makes sense to be in our collection. It's a very small scale thing, and it's relying on people to make an interlibrary loan request. So it's obviously a piece of demand-driven acquisition, but it's not leading to comprehensive collection building in any way. So we batted around the idea of doing demand-driven acquisition again for quite a while and didn't get back into it until May of 2010 when we decided to jump in fairly deeply into the pool of EBL. We loaded 42,000 records into the catalog in May of 2010, and that number is now up to 90,000. We did not budget in that initial year. We were loading them right near the end of our fiscal year, and we decided that we could probably cover it out of a small amount of end-of-year funds and mostly just let their invoices roll over into the new fiscal year. We budgeted $150,000 for fiscal year 2011, but only spent $72,000 actually over 14 months, so starting in May of 2010 and ending in June of 2011. And we budgeted the same amount for the next year, thinking, well, surely use will go up even more, and it didn't. It was about the same. So we seem, even though we have a lot of books in there, we are not spending that much money. And I'll talk a little bit about and show you the patterns of what we've purchased. Our initial criteria for EBL were fairly simple and not very. We were not very deliberately excluding things. In fact, we were trying to be as inclusive as possible in what sort of materials we made available to our users. We added books published after January 1 of 2007. We did not worry if these duplicated our print holdings. If we'd already bought the print book, we didn't care. We were actually very interested in what would happen if we allowed duplication of format. We did dedupe against ebooks that we already had in the collection, and we limited in some subject areas, but mostly just in medicine and law for various reasons. We excluded publishers. That was the way we tried to manage quality, not by subject, not in any other way. And we were pretty generous. We supplied books up to $250, and this is completely unmediated. So the EBL model is that the first 5 minutes are free. You don't buy books on Bananas unintentionally if you have 5 minutes to discover that it's a book about the culture of banana farming or the history of bananas in the West Indies. You are buying things that you've actually had a chance to examine for a little bit. The EBL model also has a short-term loan. So even when a book does get used, you're not buying it necessarily because most books never get used again. And we saw that with print, and it seems to be holding true for ebooks as well. The vast majority of books get used once or twice. And so we did a short-term loan for the first 3 uses. The short-term loan is 10 to 20% of list price, and we purchased it on the 4th use. We've recently changed that just in the last week or two to the 5th use for reasons that I'll talk about. And obviously when you buy it, you pay list price for that book. So I think that the key components of demand-driven acquisition are illustrated in that EBL model, which incidentally eBrary and NetLibrary have copied to some extent, or not NetLibrary, EBSCO ebooks have copied to some extent as they've moved forward with adding a demand-driven model for their own. The free discovery is crucial. This prevents buying books on Bananas. Free discovery is all about making sure that the books that you pay for are being used intentionally. And you can do a free discovery in a number of ways. EBL chooses to do it by time in the book, so under 5 minutes. that's a free period to figure out whether it's the right book for you or not. You could do it with a portion of the text, so you could see the table of contents and the front and back matter. You could do it in probably some other ways as well. But the point is that you need to be able to decide whether it's the right book for you or not. You need to have, or you should have, a temporary lease because you want to be able to pay, I think, by the amount of need. You don't want to buy a book if it's only going to be used one time. You should be able to purchase the book if there's going to be repeated use, and you can probably guess that if it's used several times, it's more likely to be used more times. And for me, I think it's crucial that this is an unmediated process, that for the user this is seamless and easy. In fact, the user has no idea that we are paying for the use of that book. They probably assume we already own the book. We've done more with demand-driven acquisition at University of Denver, and just a quick recent chronology. So in May of 2010, we loaded these 42,000 titles from EBL. In February of 2012, so very recently, we worked with YBP to integrate EBL into our approval plan. So instead of having a completely separate process, we're now managing this the same way we manage our approval process, which gives us our print books and some other ebooks. And the reason that this is so important is that we want to do this on a broader scale. We don't want it to just be EBL. We want it to be multiple vendors, and we want it to be print as well as E. And this seemed like the first step to do that. And incidentally, this is something that we were talking about with Blackwell before Blackwell was bought by YBP. So it's something we've been trying to do for quite a while. And we were glad to be able to do it with YBP when we could. Starting in May and through August of 2012, so very recently, we've started a small consortial pilot within the Colorado Alliance of Research Libraries. Based on a certain set of publishers just for current content, so 2012, 2013 content. We started with EBL with one set of publishers in May, and we added eBrary with another set of publishers in August, and we'll see how that goes. Also in August, we've just added eBrary into the YBP approval plan for the University of Denver, so not consortially. And that's to make sure that we're getting broader coverage of ebooks than we could with just one ebook aggregator. And we'll continue to add as others become available through YBP. Just this month as well, we added 12,000 older titles via EBL, and we increased the short-term loan from 3 to 4 before we purchased on the 5th use. And we're also just about to start, as soon as we can get the license agreement back from University Council, so maybe not quite just about ready to start, but we're soon going to start a pilot with a large humanities social sciences publisher of monographs, where they're going to make available every ebook that they have. We've committed to pay up to, or pay the amount that we've paid on average of the last several years for the print books that we buy from that publisher. And so rather than buying print, we'll make every ebook available, and at the end of the year, based on usage, we'll pay for those titles to get used. It's a sort of demand-driven acquisition project, but it's another way of thinking about it, and it allows us to continue to expand what we make available on this model. And more importantly, it allows us to continue to expand the number of titles, the range of material that we make available to our users. Here's some detail from what we've done with EBL. And this is for the first 2 years and 2 months of EBL. Over that time period, and again, we had 42,000 titles when we started, and now we have about 90,000 titles available through EBL. But over that time period, we've only bought 619 titles. So only 619 titles were used 4 or more times and led to a purchase. And we spent $49,000 on those titles. There were 5,000 titles or so with at least one short-term loan. There were obviously more than 5,000 short-term loans. And the total amount we spent over that time period for short-term loans, and that includes the short-term loans for the 619 titles that were purchased, although that number is not included in the 5,031 titles with at least one short-term loan. Right, so we're trying to, I'm counting things a little bit differently in the different columns. But the total amount we've spent for short-term loans for any of these books is just over $85,000. And yet the list price for those 5,000 titles is almost $400,000. We would have spent a lot of money, a lot more than $85,000, if we had bought every one of those titles at the point where it was used. By waiting, we saved quite a bit of money. And then there were 4,154 titles with at least one browse. So there were 4,100 titles where somebody spent under 5 minutes in that book and no other transaction happened. So there was never a short-term loan or a purchase on any of these books. We didn't spend anything on those free browses, but we would have spent $328,000 if we had bought those books up front. So the list price for the 9,804 titles that we've used through EBL over these 2 years is $776,000, and yet we spent $134,000 to provide access. One way of looking at it, and I would argue the wrong way of looking at it, is that we saved $641,000. And it's wrong for a number of reasons, but most importantly it's wrong because I don't want to save $641,000. If my monograph budget is $776,000, I want to spend $776,000 on monographs for my users. And so the only way to do that under this model is to provide many, many, many more books than the 90,000 we're now providing. And that's my goal. My goal is not to provide 25,000 books a year, which is what we do now, and then buy some portion of them and rent some portion of them. It's actually to provide hundreds or maybe even hundreds of thousands or even millions of books that we can then pay for as they're used. I think it's a way of building a much bigger collection and a much better collection. The cost per transaction for short-term loans is under $10. For auto purchase, it's just about $80. And this, I think, is really interesting. And this is the reason why we've bumped up from purchasing on the 4th loan to purchasing on the 5th loan. Doug Way and Julie Garrison from Grand Valley State University did a study that's in this David Sword's book that shows that the more short-term loans you have before purchase, the less you're going to spend overall. So it's not the case that at some point, or at least not through 7 uses, you start to lose money by not purchasing the book, right? In other words, at least through 7 uses, the use of books once they're purchased does not justify purchasing them. You end up saving more and more money. And by saving money, you can provide access to more material. So we want to expand. We want to expand this maybe in a big way, certainly in a bigger way than we're doing now. I envision a multi-format model. I want to have ebooks from multiple vendors and even from publishers directly managed through YBP. And we're already doing that with EBL and now just adding eBrary. But I'd love to be able to add as many different ebook providers as possible through the approval vendor so that we can control duplication across those ebook aggregators and ebook publishers. And I want to add print. And I've been wanting to add print now for several years. I gave a presentation at Charleston in 2009 about my desire to add print, to do print and ebook demand-driven acquisition. And I'm still hoping that we can get that done in a way that makes sense. I want to provide print books when the electronic is not available, which is most of the time actually. But more importantly maybe, I want to provide print books when the electronic version is not what is desired. Users don't always want the ebook, and that's not a surprise to anybody, but you know what? They also don't always want the print book. Sometimes they want one format and sometimes they want the other. And what I've realized is that it's not dependent on the type of material, it's not dependent on the type of book, it's entirely dependent on the type of use. And so one user might want a print book one day and the same title as an ebook another day. Another user might want the same title as an ebook, while the third user wants the same title as a print book. And it all depends on why you're using the book and what your preferences are. And so I want to figure out a way to provide access to both formats whenever possible and let the user choose. And if it's intentional use and its actual use, I am more than happy to pay for both books and add them to the collection. I'm not happy or willing to duplicate print and electronic when it's a guess about whether they'll be used. But if we know that they're being used, I think it's a great idea. And the way I want to manage this, at least at first, is through the slip notifications in the approval plan. So these are things that meet criteria that we've already established as being important for our collection. And we can then add things based on the slip plan instead of trying to decide up front which of those books we'll buy and which we'll just ignore. I want this to be someday the primary means by which we buy monographs. And someday may not be for a while. It's certainly not going to be this year or next year, but I'd like it to be that way at some point. We need to figure out how to do print if we want to do this on any sort of a large scale, because even as of just a couple weeks ago, only 42% of the books that YBP was treating on approval were coming out simultaneously as print and electronic. And their definition of simultaneous publication is 8 weeks. So if the ebook comes out within 8 weeks of the print book, that's a simultaneous publication. So demand-driven acquisition is really, I think, perfect for ebooks. I don't think there's much of a reason to buy ebooks in another way. It's seamless. The user has no idea that a transaction is happening. They get instant access to it. You can provide access to many more things if you're not buying them up front. I don't see any good reason not to do most ebook acquisition through this model. I think there may be some reasons to do some other models in some small cases, but for the most part, demand-driven acquisition makes perfect sense for ebooks. It doesn't make perfect sense for print books. It's actually a fairly difficult thing to get your head around. It's difficult for many, many reasons. One is that it needs to be automated. You can't be adding records one by one. You cannot be ordering books one by one as somebody notices that record and then writes out a request or emails you a request. I think you have to have a request form in the catalog record. In the catalog record, which is a fairly easy thing to do in some ways, but it's actually quite complex. And what you need to do is you need to be able to pass through the bibliographic information into that form, right? So when they click in that form, it needs to be pre-populated with all of that bibliographic information. At the very least, it has to have the bib record number so that you can know what it is that they're trying to order. And you need patron information to pass through as well, because you got to know who it is you're ordering it from and how to contact them, how to let them know that that print book is available. We can do that in our III traditional catalog. We have Encore from III as well, and we haven't been able to figure out how to do that yet. And we have Summon, and I'm talking with Summon, but we haven't figured that out yet either. So we're not really ready to do this until we can make it a very easy process. Those requests need to feed into a queue for acquisition staff to place those orders. And then users need to understand the process. For ebooks, they don't need to understand the process. For ebooks, as long as they can click into the ebook and have instant access and use it right away, it doesn't matter whether you're paying for that book based on that use. But for print books, they need to understand that that book is not on the shelf and that you need to order it for them, and they need to understand how long it's going to take to get that book. I also think that if we want to do a dual format demand-driven acquisition, if we want to make available the print and the electronic, we need to make it very clear to them that both versions are available whenever both versions are available. So if they click into the print and really they just need immediate access and they need it for 10 minutes, they'd probably be happy with the E, but they're not going to know you have the E necessarily unless those records speak to each other. So there needs to be a way of connecting from the ebook to the print book and explaining that connection to the user. I'm not sure we can rely on the traditional book supply network to do demand-driven acquisition. It's all set up for getting us the book at the point of publication, and we don't want the book at the point of publication if we're doing this. We want it years or months or decades from now. And we need to be relatively sure that we can get that book many, many years from now. And as you all know, there are very small print runs for scholarly monographs, and they go out of print pretty quickly. And so we need some way of being sure that they are available. We need to move from bulk shipments to title-by-title shipments if we're doing this, which means more cost for shipping. And we need to do rush ordering, which means even more cost for shipping. But there are some things that are promising, I think, to make me think that it's possible to actually do demand-driven acquisition of print. For one point, there's commercial print on demand, which means that books should not ever go out of print. They should always be available. Lightning Source is a company it's a division of Ingram, and if you ever get a chance to tour the Lightning Source warehouse where they create these books, it's really staggeringly amazing. If they get an order if Amazon gets an order for a book at 9 a.m., it's being printed in this Lightning Source warehouse at 9:15 a.m. And the dust jacket is getting made, and the hardcover binding, it looks just like a real book. It comes off the shelf, and it goes down a conveyor belt where it gets packed into an Amazon envelope, and it gets sent to you right away. It's an amazing process, and it tells me that books don't need to go out of print. And it tells me, too, that something like that could serve libraries in a demand-driven model very well. Right? We could order from that source and have it shipped quickly and easily, because that's all about one-off shipping. It's all about title by title. It's all about rush ordering. I also think that the increased availability of ebooks makes demand-driven acquisition of print easier. So if you always have the ebook version and the print version, somebody can make do with the ebook version while they're waiting for the print. And I think, at least at my institution, we have ever greater comfort from users with requesting books in the first place. More and more of our books are in remote storage, and more often we're relying on partners elsewhere in the state to borrow books and have them delivered here. And our users are used to that to varying degrees. And so to the extent that they are used to waiting for days or even a week or more for a book, maybe it's not so bad to do print this way. In the future, I want to do ebooks on demand and a local print on demand option. And so rather than ordering print from somewhere else, it'd be great if you could just give it to somebody that day or that week. But the print on demand technology, the espresso book machine primarily, is just really not there yet. It would be nice if there was something where you could do print on demand and get it to your user, right away within an hour or so. I want to make available everything that we can afford, and that might actually be a fairly large amount of material. I don't really know what it is, but just thinking about EBL and our experience with EBL, we're starting to approach 100,000 titles available. And yet we're only spending $60,000, $70,000 a year to provide access to that material. So I think this is something that we can do in a fairly large scale, and I'm optimistic about this being something that we can do at least for a sizable portion of the collection, and that we can make better collections available to our users. I want to do this ultimately for most or all of the monograph's budget. I don't know that that's possible yet. In fact, I'm sure it's not possible yet. I don't know that it'll ever be possible, but I'd like to do it on a scale bigger than what we've been doing now, on a scale that is really meaningful as we try to build collections. I have one sort of last point about this, and this is a story. This is, I guess, a story of what one of my selectors said when I first started talking about doing demand-driven acquisition of print monographs. This was again in 2009, and I'm not sure why I started thinking about it, but it it occurred to me all of a sudden that we should not be ordering things off of the slip portion of the approval plan. We were Blackwell then, so it was the forms portion of the approval plan. But I decided that what we really needed to be doing was loading all of those into the catalog and making them available for our users. And I brought this idea back to our collection development team, our selectors, and I said, what do you think? And some of them said it was a horrible idea. Some of them said it was a great idea because they'd never have to go through their slips again. And surprisingly to me, our humanities librarian, who spends a lot of time and knows the collection really well and knows her users really well and is very, very, very serious and diligent about her collection development responsibilities, she thought this was the best idea of any of the people in the group. And I was actually not sure if she'd like the idea at all. And one of the reasons that she thought it was a good idea was that she recognized right away that it could make it possible for the users to make that decision that she was having a hard time making in certain subject areas. And the example that she used was contemporary art. We have a program, and we have a doctoral program in art and art history. We have people who buy or who study contemporary artists. She always has people coming in and asking her about contemporary art. And inevitably, they want to use the book by the book about the artist that she chose not to buy. They know, and it's she sees that it's when you order contemporary art books, you're really gambling because these people are just starting to develop a reputation. They're just starting to become known, and you never know which ones are the ones that the students are going to want to use, that the faculty are going to assign. And so she thought, wow, I could load all of those contemporary art records into the catalog. I could make those available. And instead of making the wrong decision up front, I allow the student to make the decision at the point of need. And I thought, yes, that's exactly what the point is. And that was what really got me thinking about doing this on a broad scale. At that point, I was thinking about doing it just with the slip notification, but I think we can do it more broadly than that even. And next week, what we'll talk about is, or 2 weeks, I think, on October 3rd, we'll talk about doing this on a broader scale and what that might mean for libraries and publishers and approval vendors. And so now I'm gonna take questions. I think that Kristen has to do something to open us up for questions.
Well, this is Kristen, and now is a great time to go ahead and type in your questions. I am not seeing any questions so far, so we'll just give people a minute to go ahead and type things in. And Michael will be happy to try to answer them. All right, we got one that just popped in here, Michael, and it says, do your users discover the EBL DDA titles via your library catalog? And if yes, has there been concerns about the DDA records crowding out your search results?
Yes, they do discover them via the catalog, and no, I don't think there have been any concerns about that. There have been concerns more generally, in some cases, about only finding ebooks. And so we've had people say, I do all these searches and everything's an ebook. And sometimes that's a compliment. Sometimes that's somebody actually being very happy because they're actually impressed that we're providing ebooks. But occasionally it's somebody who wants a print book and is a little concerned about it. But most of the time when we have a lot of ebooks crowding out the results, there are things like computer manuals where you probably want an ebook more than anything else. So there haven't really been concerns about EBL records per se, though there have been some about ebook records in general.
Okay, a question here from Barbara Hildebrand, very briefly. What is the FTE of Denver?
If you include the law school, it's just over 10,000, but they're a separate entity. Without the law school, we're around 9,000 or so.
All right, thanks. And Emily Hutton-Hughes asked, how do you decide on that magic number of titles which you need to make available to spend the full amount of your acquisitions budget? And what do you do with the leftover funds as the fiscal year is winding down?
Right. I mean, that's the big question, and that's the question that clearly we haven't answered yet because we're not making available that magic number yet. I don't know, and I suspect it's very different for every institution. And I'll use my institution and Regis University, which is also in Denver, as an example. We have an FTE of 9,000 or so. Regis has an FTE of a little bit more than ours. I think their FTE is a little over 10,000. We have a collections budget of $5.5 million. We have a lot of books. We have a lot of stuff in our catalog. We have more than 2 million volumes. Regis, I don't know what their collection budget is, but I know that it's a fraction of ours. Maybe it might be $1 million. Same user size. They also have a lot of distance education programs, so ebooks are going to get used more heavily. If they were to put in 42,000 ebooks from EBL, I guarantee, I have no doubt that more of them would be used than the 42,000 at my institution, because they would represent a larger portion of their collection. They have more users of ebooks because they have such strong distance programs, and they have such a tiny budget that they might not be able to handle that. So I think it's a very tricky question. And I even suspect, and I don't know this, but I suspect that my institution may have sort of that sweet spot of small FTE and large collection budget where we might not ever be able to hit that number where we would spend everything that we have available to spend. In other words, we have only so many people who can use material, and we have a lot of money to spend on it. I hope we do get to that point, because then we can spend it on subscriptions and other things, which is what we do with leftover funds. We've been usually, as the year is winding down, we've been doing a lot of purchasing of digital primary source materials, things like EBO and ECHO and the Archives Unbound from Gale and that sort of thing.
All right, thank you. We have a question here from Michael Cromie, who asks, can you address successful marketing strategies that you've used at the University of Denver for marketing the DDA program? In particular, how do your users, especially the faculty, respond to the shift from print to electronic?
It's actually, I guess I'll answer the first question first, which is we haven't marketed it one bit. I don't see a reason to market it because we're not telling anybody as they use these ebooks that there's a transaction going on. There is an option to make it mediated. I mean, so we could have said, we'll make them available, but if anybody ever goes beyond the browse point, they need to have the short-term loan or the purchase approved. But we didn't see the point of that. My feeling is if I'm making it available in the catalog, I am promising to make it available in full text to the user at the point of need. So we haven't marketed it. That said, we would need to market it for sure if we were doing it with print. And we've told faculty that we're doing it in our library liaison meetings. So we have a quarterly series of meetings with the liaisons from the various departments to the library. And we talked about this project there. And you know, there's a whole range of responses, both to the concept and to ebooks in general. And it's hard, it's actually can often be very hard to separate the conversation about ebooks from the conversation about demand-driven acquisition. So sometimes it's, you know, I hate all ebooks, shouldn't have any, but we also have people saying it's so great you have all these ebooks, I love it, can we get more? And I think the response from faculty about ebooks is always going to vary, or at least is going to vary until ebooks are much easier to use. In terms of the concept of demand-driven acquisition, at first there was the first time I tried to explain it, I made some assumptions that I probably shouldn't have made, and one of those was that they understood the approval plan, and obviously I should have assumed they did not, because somebody said, well, you're letting somebody else choose what goes into the collection, and I said, well, yeah, and then I had to explain that that's what we've been doing for years, that we have this approval plan, and it's got, you know, and then it was sort of okay once this person understood that this was basically another way of thinking about that same approval plan concept. But I think it's important to explain it in that context, that it's not actually us opening up the catalog to tons of junk. We are carefully profiling what gets made available, just as we always have.
All right, thanks. A question here from Melissa Kovac, who asks, what do you do in the case of reference books where many cases might appear just to be browsing?
Yeah, well, there aren't that many. There aren't actually that many reference books available in this package. I would think that if there was a large collection of reference books available, the publisher and the aggregator would probably want to rethink that browsing window of 5 minutes, because you're right. And I'm sure, I'm 100% certain that some portion, and maybe even some large portion of those 4,000 or so free browses were actually uses. The person used the book as much as they needed to, and it was just under 5 minutes. And that's more likely to happen with a reference book. We haven't had to think about it because there aren't that many reference books in these collections, but I do think that you could build a reference collection this way. You would just have to think about it with the aggregator or the vendor or the publisher or whoever is managing it, and how you would do those transactions. Would they be based on the article level? Would they be based on the entry itself? And I don't know what the right answer is for reference books, but we haven't really thought about this with reference books because we haven't had to.
Okay. We have a question here from John Ritterbush, and I think this has to do with what records you're getting into your catalog. He asks, what methods do you use to dedupe ebook records? Is this done by YBP for your profile, or is this something that you generate in-house and send to YBP?
A little bit of both. So when we did our initial load, it was easy because we were doing a retrospective load, and we just deduped against the ebook records that were already in the catalog, right? We sent that to EBL, and it was easy. Once we started getting books added, we have not been trying, we haven't even tried to dedupe 100%. So what we do instead is we have decided we're not going to worry too much if there's a duplication against a subscription package. So we have books 24/7, we have Novel, we have the eBrary Academic Complete package, we have Safari. All of those are subscriptions, right, where titles can come and go. It's the same thing as having EBSCO's Academic Search Complete. You're not really, right, you're paying for access to a large amount of full-text content, but you're not paying for the guarantee that that content is going to remain there. And so we've decided that because of that, we're not going to worry too much if we duplicate against that content. We do worry if we duplicate against publisher content. We worry if we duplicate against content that we have purchased in some way. And so the way we've done that is also not sending anything to YBP, but telling YBP, block this publisher or block this type of title from this publisher. So from Oxford, block Oxford Scholarship Online because we have that package. But we haven't been as I guess as stringent about deduping as some others might be. And but to me, the place where I've seen most of that duplication is against those subscription packages. And I'm not worried so much about that because we don't own that content. That said, I think that we could actually generate lists of things from once the EBL records arrive. We could generate lists and sort of dedupe sort of as sort of in real time, I suppose. But we haven't done that.
Okay, thanks. A question from Hamela Blue. If you have an ebook with simultaneous users, how is that handled?
Okay, so the EBL model is 325 uses a year. And if those 325 uses all happen at the same exact time, which they never have for us, that would solve that problem. So the EBL model sort of builds in that multiple users can use something at the same time, and it just sort of counts against your use quota for the year. The eBrary model, we're doing SUPO, which is the single user purchase option, I believe, SUPO. We're not doing MUPO, which is the multiple use user purchase option. So we are moving into eBrary just now on demand. We haven't done anything with them yet. What we've been talking about with eBrary, and eBrary has already sort of rolled this out not on demand, but they've rolled this out for purchase content, is that you can sort of build into your profile a SUPO to MUPO buy-up. So if you have a book that you've purchased a single user option for, single user license for, and a second user clicks into that book, instead of getting turned away, you'll just get a bill for the difference between the SUPO price and the MUPO price. And we'd like to build that in for demand-driven acquisition.
All right, thanks. Another question from Cynthia Holt. How do you handle popular computer internet type manuals, and are these included in your DDA?
Yeah, they are. You know, we're probably a little more wide open available than some other libraries. With the 12,000 titles that we just added, where we went back earlier than 2007, we decided to add just university presses and a core list of other publishers. And so we've been pretty so those are we're pretty confident are scholarly monographs. The stuff we added from 2007 to the present, we were a little bit wider open at first, and so we were basically, if it was published from somebody who we hadn't excluded specifically, so if it was a widely popular computer manual, it was available for use. When we moved into EBL, it moved into this to YBP, we decided to manage it through the approval plan. And so if it was not something that matched our approval plan criteria, it didn't show up in EBL. Which is another reason, obviously, to work with YBP, because they have that capability. So that would block out things like some of the popular material. We've just decided to reverse that decision with YBP. And part of it is I'm just curious to see what happens. We've decided to, instead of managing what comes to us through YBP, YBP is going to manage all the process, but we're going to get every title from EBL that meets those broader criteria we established initially. So we've opened up, and we've done it for a number of reasons. One reason is that the staff in the University Technology Services, they use a lot of those manuals. We've opened up to the dummies guides, and we find that they get used pretty heavily, and I think that's okay. We have travel manuals available, so you can buy a Fodor's or a Frommer's guide, and we've done that actually pretty intentionally because we have a very, very robust study abroad program. We're like second or third in the country in terms of the percentage of our students who study abroad. And so for all of those reasons, we decided to open it up pretty far. And part of that is because we're still feeling this out and seeing what happens. We could compress or expand as we go forward.
All right, well, thanks. We're running out of time for questions, and I know there are still a number of questions left, but we will be sending Michael the list of questions so he can try to get to.
Great. And I'm going to quickly touch on this one last question about how long do potential titles uploaded to the OPAC stay, and I'm going to say that's one of the topics of conversation on the 3rd.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I was hoping we could get to that one, but I noticed our time is getting really short now. So I'm just going to pop back over to some wrap-up information from Alex, and really thank you, Michael, for this really excellent introduction to demand-driven acquisitions and fielding all these questions. It's quite fascinating. And thanks to everybody who attended. We hope that you found today's session useful. We're going to be sending out a short online evaluation form, and appreciate it if you could take a few minutes to respond to the questions and return the form to us, and We do take a look at the comments in the ALCTS committee and we use them to plan additional continuing education offerings. So just a quick plug to some upcoming ALCTS opportunities. And I've put some information on this slide, and you can find out more details on all these things by following the link that's up there. We have a number of webinars scheduled for 2012, and I've just shown the ones that are up through October, which of course includes the DDA Part 2, and I think most of you will be joining us for that, where Mike will be joined by Barbara Kowecki and Rebecca Seeger for a more in-depth discussion on concerns and questions related to DDA and getting some more publisher perspective out here. We also offer a number of courses on different topics, and I've listed them here. They are offered multiple times throughout the year, so if you're interested in any of that, you can go and look on the website. And finally, I didn't want to forget about our e-forums, and we do have one actually going on right now today. And these are targeted two-day email discussions on a particular topic, and you can find out further information on the website. And you're also welcome to suggest webinar topics and other continuing education ideas through that link if something happens. So before we sign off, I'd just like to thank Jane Rosario and Felicity Dykas, who provided technical support behind the scenes. This went very smoothly, but it's really due to our CE's technical support subcommittee that makes it possible for everything to go like this. And then we'll be back for more on DDA on October 3rd. So thanks for joining us.